as all of this continues on Ukraine, these attacks, there are growing calls for NATO to declare the skies over that country a no-fly zone.
For a closer look at this, we are joined by CTV's military analyst, retired Major General David Fraser, also former commander of NATO forces in southern Afghanistan. David, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on our show. Let's talk about this no-fly zone. It has been implemented 3 times in the recent past. Obviously, during those times when NATO and its allies declared the no-fly zones, they were dealing with far inferior military forces. So if they do this time against Russia, how might that be catastrophic given Russia's military power?
Well, the military, well, not the military, but the political leaders have already indicated they're not going to put troops on the ground in Ukraine because Ukraine's not a member of NATO. But the other thing we should recognize is Russia has perhaps one of the best air defense capabilities in the world, exemplified by the S-400 air defense surface-to-air missile. And that in itself would provide a great deterrence for us to try to keep the airspace over Ukraine free. But the key thing is we're inching towards a war if we declare a no-fly zone, because that means we would have to defend that zone, and that could potentially put NATO aircraft and systems inside of Ukraine, which would be a provocation against Russia. So this is really almost a non-starter.
Okay, speaking of deterrence, we heard, Vladimir Putin saber rattling a little over the weekend, talking about, Russia's nuclear capability and sort of, activating a nuclear force in Russia. What do you make of that coming from Putin?
Well, Putin is a different person than we've dealt with for the last 20 years. He's angry. He's, edgy. We are actually isolating him slowly and a lot faster in some ways than we would have expected. So for him to make this announcement, he has done everything he said he was going to do and more. We shouldn't trust him. And at the same time, we should be wary of him. So when he says he's prepared to use his nuclear forces and he has put them on high readiness, we should be very cautious that we don't triggers an unintended consequence. This is perhaps the most dangerous thing we are facing as a West today, in addition to what already is a really dangerous situation in Ukraine.
Right. Of course, we know that the U.S. and Russia together, they can control 90% of the world's nuclear powers. So what do you think the U.S. can do now, or the other countries and NATO ally countries can do in terms of imposing sanctions? Because it seems like we're walking or treading a fine line now. What do you see coming next?
Well, carrying on with the sanctions, we've gone after Lavrov, we've gone after Putin, making sure that the SWIFT system is closed so there are no back doors. We are putting pressure on Putin, and in fact is demonstrated by the people of Russia standing up. The run on the ruble, the run on the banks, we have to keep doing that. So we actually pressure Putin, not from the West, but from within his own country. And that might also alleviate some of the pressure on the nuclear option.
How would you evaluate how Ukraine and Ukrainians have defended themselves? We've seen President Zelensky out on the street, former President Poroshenko out on the streets, armed, ready to go, ready to take on the Russian attack. I mean, what do you make of that as a former soldier yourself?
Ukraine started off slowly. Zelensky has turned out to be a great warrior leader. And the people of Ukraine have demonstrated their will through their determination of going onto the streets. Look at the thousands of men who are going back into Ukraine to fight for their country. The Ukrainians are putting up a credible defense against the Russians. But let there be no mistake, the Russians are not done. The Russians are amassing even more combat power. This is going to be a bloody battle for Ukraine, and there's a lot more to come.
Yeah, really important context to keep in mind. We appreciate your time this afternoon. Retired Major General David Fraser, former commander, of course, of NATO forces in southern Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you.